Okay, I think we're looking good. So I will begin. So thank you everybody for coming. This should prove to be a very interesting experience. Mike Jackson styles himself as a systems thinker, whilst Gene Bolton embraces complexity. Both have written very recent but very, very different books. I'm sure they will be recommending everybody to get a copy of both after this, so you could compare and contrast. On the surface, they both seem to inhabit different worlds, but the question is, do they really? And how do those differing views complement each other? Are there any incompatibilities, or is it more a question of what you are trying to do? To give you a background on both of our speakers, Professor Michael Jackson is an emeritus professor at the University of Hull and managing director of Systems Research Limited. He is well known for his contribution of critical systems thinking, which suggests diversity can be a strength rather than a weakness, by revealing how different systems methodologies address various aspects of complexity and how they can be used in combination to resolve the messiest of wicked problems. His latest book, Critical Systems Thinking, A Practitioner's Guide, was published by Wiley in 2024. Dr. Gene Bolton is a fellow of the Institute of Physics and a visiting academic with the Department of Social and Policy Sciences at Bath and with Cranfield School of Management. She's a consultant, writer, researcher, and lecturer about the science of complexity and its implications for strategy, change, and leadership. The latest book, The Tao, I always get that wrong, of Complexity, Tao? Gene, is that right? Tao? You can tell I'm from Liverpool. The Tao of Complexity, Making Sense and Making Waves in Turbulent Times, published by De Gruyter in 2024, introduces process complexity, reflects on its resonance with ideas from many other fields of knowledge, from neuroscience to politics to quantum gravity, and that's how we can make waves in the world of increasing fragility, polarization, and alienation. Both speakers have extensive experience in the field of systems thinking and complexity, and they will bring their unique perspectives to the event. So I would first like to ask Jean if she could tell us what the book is about.
Yes, well, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. It's very, very nice to be here, and lots of names and faces I recognise. So I'm very appreciative of being invited to take part in this discussion. I've thought a lot about I've read Mike's book and I've read mine, you'll be pleased to know, and thought a lot about what is it I've been trying to do. What is the book about is a really good question. And I think what it has occurred to me in terms of approaching books and people doing things like me is to kind of ask myself, what's the ground on which I stand? What's my kind of belief system, my frame of reference, my starting point that's driving this book? And then the associated question is, what's the driving question that drives me in my life? You know, what is it that I carry with me that I'm trying to answer in writing a book like this? And I think my answer to my own question is that the real foundational question for me is to do with almost a metaphysical question about, you know, what is the nature of things? Maybe this comes from being a physicist and from some of the kind of quests that I had even as a teenager. But this like, what is the world really like? How does change really happen? How does reality show up? Is there a reality? Is a sort of question that's been there for me for a long time. And I guess I'm asking in this book, what is the complex real world really like? And in the way that my mum would have heard the word complexity and would have kind of imagined it meant, well, everything's complex, so what do? You can't know anything, you better get on with it. What this book is trying to do is to really try and unpick the nature of the complex world. And what entranced me in thinking about this book over several years was when I looked at books on the brain, or when I looked at various political writers who are really embedded, who were kind of writing from an experiential point of view about the nature of change and the nature of things. I found very similarities between these different contexts. There was a sort of resonance, something I've called ontological resonance between these different fields. And I'm not saying to you that they're the same, or, you know, you have to believe me. I'm saying, isn't it interesting? Go and look for yourself. There may be something kind of innately interesting about the nature of the complex world. And I describe in the book, my starting kind of image, I guess, is to do with situations being open to their wider environment. Nothing new there, something Mike would talk about too, but situations that are open to their wider environment. But I'm thinking about things where there are diverse things, where things can mean all sorts of things, interacting reflexively. So there's something about diversity, reflexive interacting. And that when you have those kind of conditions, be they in an ecology, a galaxy, a brain, a family, a society, you tend to find that things emerge and stabilize as patterns of behavior, as patterns of relationships. So this idea of patterning, which is a softer word than systems, but is not a long way away, it has a more diffuse sense of boundaries, is something that I'm writing about centrally. So that the central ideas about process complexity that I'm describing is about the way patterns are held together. There's something about the interweaving is what holds those systemic patterns in place. And we don't have to look at separate kind of distinctions between the fact that sometimes those patterns become more chaotic, sometimes they become very locked in, sometimes they become very organic and relatively stable and adaptive. But the idea of the kind of the complexity of patterning is an underpinning idea. And I guess the other couple of ideas that I would add to that is this idea of things are always becoming. And the paradox of the idea of things always becoming is it's the very same mechanism that holds things in place, that creates kind of cultural norms or norms of ways of working in organizations, that it's the same process that actually allows things to unravel and change. So there's something about always becoming, and Prigogine talked, one of his first books was called From Being to Becoming, and I think that's a sort of central idea. So that's the kind of what the book's about, the beginning of the book. And I make a big exploration of the idea of intrinsic indeterminism. So this isn't saying that the complex world is too complicated to know or too messy to know. It's saying that there's an essential indeterminism about things. It doesn't mean we know nothing, but there are limits to what we can know, not because it's difficult, but because there isn't anything to know. There's something that's critically subjective, that can't be pinned down because it can't be pinned down. So that's something I explore in the book, and I try and show. I did eventually put these bits in the appendix, not to frighten the horses, but I'm talking about how the physicist doesn't really think that the world is determined either. When you add all the bits of physics together and apply them to a messy open system, then there's something that has a limit to determinism. Final point is that what am I trying to do in the book? Well, partly I'm trying to shine this lens of my complexity ontology at what does it mean for an individual? How do I change? Who am I? What does it mean to change, to engage? I'm also asking the question of around strategy and change. What does it mean for organizations? And my consultancy work, and I think this is kind of important as well, has tended to be around strategy and change. I was the practice director of the strategy and change practice for one of the big consultancies for a while, and that has driven the kind of sort of questions I ask. And then the final thing is to do with global issues. And I think what drives me is that this stuff matters. I think we might come back to that. I do want to play my part in making the world a better place. So I have a kind of ethical underpinning to this. And I think that you have to read my book in terms of me putting myself in the book and allowing you to see that this stuff is important to me. What the book isn't is a book about methods. It's not that I don't think methods are important, but I'm more interested in this book in talking about how do we conceive of the world, what do we believe about things, which allows us, in the way that I think Mike describes, to then pick your methods depending on the situation. So I've probably that's probably enough from me, probably too much. So Mike, what's your book about?
Okay, here it is, Critical Systems Thinking, a Practitioner's Guide. And I'm grateful, like Jean, to be able to join this debate, because I've learned a lot from Jean's book, and also in thinking about the relationship between systems thinking and complexity. The book's my attempt, a different sort of premise to Jean's, really. It's my attempt to put together what I think is most valuable in the systems thinking tradition, what I've learned about systems thinking and practice over the last 40 years, and to do so in a digestible and useful way, maybe slightly more digestible than the 700-page tome which preceded it. So to put together what I know about systems thinking in a digestible and useful way. It's got 3 parts to it. The first part talks about the rise of critical systems thinking. that starts with why systems thinking at all, and the reasons for that. One, the failure of the traditional scientific method to deal with complexity, the fact that traditional science leaves out a lot of what leads to complexity, particularly the subjective side, the fact that science itself has rejected now the old reductionist and mechanistic paradigm, and the impact of purely following a scientific method in terms of pollution and all the rest of the problems that might stem from that. And then go on to discuss systems thinking as a complementary approach that potentially can deal with complexity, organize complexity in a better way. Two sort of strands of systems thinking. The systems science strand, an attempt to find general laws of systems of all types. I think it's a dead end. I'm much more interested in the other form of systems thinking, which has produced a variety of systems methodologies linked to particular worldviews, which I think are a powerful lever to enable people to improve things. But because there are a variety of systems approaches, the transdiscipline fragmented and needed bringing back together again. And that's what critical systems thinking seeks to do, to bring it back together again, through adopting a philosophy of pragmatism, which I explain, critique, so we know what the different approaches are good at and what they're not so good at, pluralism, arguing that you need multiple worldviews and multiple methods, and to use them in combination if necessary, and seeking to bring about multifaceted improvement, not just to efficiency, but to resilience, to human purpose, to society and organizations generally. The second part of the book outlines the way of making use of this lot of systems ideas, that what the systems traditions come up with. And I outline a multi-methodology, which tongue-in-cheek I call EPIC, because it's an ideal type of, if you were able to take advantage of everything the systems thinking tradition was able to offer you and to put it to use, this is how you would use it. And of course, in any particular situation, resource constraints or other constraints will prevent you from doing this, and you'll have to work your way around it, work your way through it, adjusting as necessary. So EPIC consists of 4 stages, is a major part of the book, exploring the problem situation through a variety of different systemic perspectives. And they come from world hypotheses and social theories which have proven useful to the human species over time. So they're not just picked out of the air. In a pragmatic sense, they've proven useful to human beings in terms of navigating the world. And it's helpful to look at the world through those different systemic perspectives. The second element is produce. There happens to be 5 types of systems methodology or approach, each corresponding to one of the systemic perspectives that I mentioned. Those are incidentally the mechanical, interrelationships, organismic, purposeful, and societal environmental. There are systemic methodologies which address, are able to respond to issues that you might pick out using the different systemic perspectives. So, for example, if looking at an organization through the organismic perspective, you discovered it didn't look particularly resilient, you'd be able to find a systems methodology which enabled you to correct that issue, seek to correct that issue, make it more resilient. The third element is intervening flexibly. Because of this fact that you can't use all the approaches and methodologies at once, you have to find your way through it. Things are constantly changing, so you need to operate flexibly. And finally, checking on whatever improvements you've made in a multifaceted way. So you're checking on whether you've improved efficiency, resilience, purpose in terms of stakeholders. You've made the system respond to its community, to the wider world, and it's not damaging the environment, and it's not, through its interrelationships, having unintended consequences. So that's the sort of basic way of trying to put all those ideas of systems thinking and practice together. The third element is called Towards a Systems Thinking World. And there I talk about the huge demand there is for systems thinking and practice out there in the world, is exhibited by loads of organizations calling for it. But the barriers, also talk about the barriers in the way of implementing systems thinking. And there are a lot that are preventing it realizing its potential. And finally, I talk about how you might be able to overcome those barriers through systemic leadership, which I regard as having the leadership team having certain attributes, being able to view the world through different perspectives, different worldviews, the 5 systemic perspectives, and having an awareness of the various systems methodologies that can help you to do things if you find problems or issues through observing the world through the 5 systemic perspectives. My summary.
Excellent. Very nicely timed as well. I was just thinking, or do I need to interject? So thank you both of you very much for introducing your books and giving us a really good flavour for what they're about. What I would ask you to do is now debate between yourselves almost. How do you see the similarities and differences between your books?
Do you want to go first, Jean? Should we do similarities?
Yes, yes. Let me talk a bit around it. So what I like about it as well, and is it's very readable. I've enjoyed it. I can't say I've read every single word, but I've enjoyed it, and I like the fact you're in it, and that it's your journey. There's something, you know, engaging about the fact you say at one point, you know, well, I used to think that the world was something that was kind of, you know, objectively real out there, and all you had to do, you know, my words, not yours, was find it. But now I know you kind of embrace that sort of general complexity perspective. So it has this humility that around that idea of you learning and you engaging, and you can see it's very well referenced. You can see you're engaging with people and responding to feedback. So I like that. I think we have a similarity in terms of being interested in pragmatism. There's no right answer. There's no one way. And I've been interested in the pragmatism view of a naturalistic metaphysics, so the fact that you get to know about things in an empirical way, and rather than through a kind of theory lens. So we have that in common. And I like the way, you know, it's practical. You know, there's a sense in which you can say, well, you know, here are some systems methodologies, you know, this is how you might use them, you know, and there's a kind of explore, plan, do, review sort of, you know, your epic structure. So I think I can see, as somebody coming into the field, there's something practical to use. And I think, you know, I think we're different in that you have, and I think the systems thinking field, and it's not just me saying this, has a more epistemological feel. It's saying, how do we know about what's there? and I'm introducing almost the idea that if people understood the nature of the complex world some more, they would pick and choose what they did in a different way. They would ask different questions. So there's a different feel there, perhaps, between us. The other thing I feel that I would struggle, or I would want to add to it, is I think sometimes systems thinking preferences what is. So there's a sense of in which that there's something that says this is, if we can really understand, systemically and with its complexity what is, then we'll know what to do, or it will lead us into action. And I think that complexity thinkers, or I tend to have this dual kind of paradoxical question, which is I'm interested in what is. I do want to understand the patterns. I do map things when I'm working with clients, but I've always got this idea of where's it come from? Where's it going? What are the signs of newness? What about the future? How embedded from the past are some of the patternings we see here? So I think there's something that it still feels a little bit that it's about, these are methods to explore what is here, as opposed to what is becoming, or what is dissolving, or what's qualitatively new. So it feels slightly different about that. And I'd also thought about, in terms of, you talk about progress with your P, there's also something perhaps that you could add to that, which is more about what's changing in the wider world, or are there signs of positively unintended consequences? Are there things that the project didn't intend but are actually really positive, or is there something so different that's coming into the outside world? So there's something more about it's not just the progress of the thing you're doing, but the continually kind of reviewing, which you do say. I'm sure you wouldn't disagree with that, but it's a slightly different emphasis. And my final point I wanted to make was that with the different lenses, it feels a little bit that you're saying choose the one that fits best. Whereas another way of approaching it would be to say, here are a set of questions. If I was working, which I do sometimes, in, help me improve my hospital, then, maybe what I'd be saying, maybe your lenses would give me a set of questions. So I might be saying, in what ways is this too rigid? In what ways do the mechanical aspects of the hospital work? Or I might be saying, what is going on in the wider context of the hospital? What relationships does it have with other hospitals and with public health, or what are the determinants of health in the wider environment? So I think I might use it more as a series of questions, and then work with managers to say, out of all that, then what are the kind of core patterns? Where are the intervention points? Or is this a fast changing situation, or something that's got very locked in? So it's that there's slight differences, and I don't know that I think there's a difference in mindset sometimes between people who are more drawn to what they call systems thinking or complexity thinking, but certainly the methods I use, I would use mapping. I would work with a group of people to start planning what they should do. It's not totally different. It sometimes gets played out as being more different than it is, but there is maybe a difference of emphasis. So
yeah,
how about you, Mike?
Well, I disagree with a couple of those points, but I'll pick them up as we go along. In terms of similarities, and we both want to shift things from the mechanistic worldview, which is dominated because people have taken what they believe science was about and translated it to other domains where it's perhaps not particularly apt. So you say that yours is ontologically driven. You want to replace an old ontology of the world as a mechanistic thing to the more complex version that complexity theory reveals. I think that's fine. I mean, that's what I would say as well. There's you say mindsets. Once you talked about ontology, you start talking about mindsets in practitioner parlance, and you say that those are crucial because they determine what we do. and I would agree with that. So I'm after changing mindsets as well. And I think that critical systems thinking has actually always considered ontology, if I wanted to pick up that point, in that it's always asked what vision of the world is underpinning this particular way of intervening. So it does ask the ontological question, I think. We both operate within Edgar Morin's concept of generalized complexity, as you hinted at, Jean. And that means something quite important, that we both see models as still significant, but mainly when restricted complexity was an appropriate approach. And we would, I think, agree that models miss out a great deal when a general complexity approach is required, because of, well, for one thing, the subjectivity involved in complexity, which requires a generalized complexity approach. There's pragmatism in common, therefore no universal truth. Multiple perspectives are important, and translating that into methodologies and methods, nobody can claim that. I think we'd both agree that their own favored methodology or method was suitable in all circumstances. It's contingent upon the circumstances which might bring the best results for the human species. In James' terms, which approach will bring cash things in for the human species. I particularly like the fact that we both draw upon a whole variety of sources outside systems and complexity theory. And I think this is important. Once you accept there are different ways of knowing, not just a scientific method. There are a whole host of different ways of knowing. So we reference a lot of the same people, McGilchrist, Fitzgerald, Goethe, because of his he wanted a science which can incorporate subjectivity. We both draw upon non-Western sources. Obviously, you on Taoism. I talk a bit about Chinese philosophy, but also indigenous thought. And also, we both draw upon art and poetry and music. You cite Leonard Cohen and Joni Mitchell, Cat Stevens, but you miss out, of course, the greatest, Bob Dylan, who I do draw upon to some extent.
I think we're showing our age in this collection of artists.
Doesn't matter, we've got to get it right. And I also like the call to action. I don't think we have very dissimilar views on the state of the world. And I agree as well with once you lack certainty, then ethics becomes important. As Bob Dylan said, once you live outside the law, you have to be honest. You have to be ethical. And I like that. And I can see how uncertainty takes you to that position. And the fact that in my book, I talk about different ways of looking at the world and related ways of intervening in it, that immediately draws to your attention the ethical choices involved. I've got 2 points of difference, Jean. I think the first one is inevitable, that you come from a physical science background, and I come more from a social science background. And you say at one point, one of the reasons complexity theory is important is because it gains its authority from roots in science. That's what you say. So you're abandoning one version of the scientific method, mechanistic one, and you're taking on another one. I am much less certain than you of the relevance of science to the social domain. I'm a person that believes in the real significance of emergence. Two really significant elements of emergence are, of course, the emergence of life and the emergence of consciousness. And whatever conditions give rise to that, this is a distinction you make, I think the characteristics that come about because of emergence mean that you require a very different approach when it comes to the social domain than is required in the scientific domain. So it doesn't really matter to me if the whole of complexity science was found to be out of date, just as the way that mechanistic thinking was found to be out of date. And I would still look at the social domain, be concerned with that. So just one point, and I'll let you come in. So I'm not sure to what extent you rely on science, or to what extent you're saying, well, here's some useful metaphors which we can translate from science to the social domain. But my own work has always been in the social domain, asking what worldviews, what methodologies can bring improvement in the social domain, because they've been proven over time to be useful in that domain. And that, I think, is a genuine pragmatist element to my work. What is it that enables us to do well as a human species? These are 5 systemic perspectives, happen to have 5 methodologies associated with them, and they can generate improvements, as they have done, proven to do previously.
Thanks, Mike. Sorry, so I think you've misunderstood what I meant when I said that this has some power because it has its roots in science. It just means that when I talk to managers who think a mechanical worldview is being scientific, I can go, well, actually, there's another sort of science, the science of open systems, which is also scientific, but is much more applicable to the social world. Now, what I'm not saying is, therefore, because I'm talking ontologically rather than epistemologically, I'm not even really talking about I mean, it's important what people, so what I'm driving at and interested in is that there's an ontological similarity between Prigogine looking at the Belousov-Zapatinsky experiment and what people are talking about in brains and what people are talking about in society. And I'm not taking methods from science, from physics. I'm just saying, isn't it interesting that there's a resonance between what's going on in physics and what's going on in the physics of open systems? But it's not a methodological, it's not a metaphor. It's saying, I'm finding something similar here because I'm digging all the time for this kind of, I'm not asking what's your ontology, I'm asking it's more of a metaphysical question, which is there something common about the nature of reality? It's a bit like Whitehead talking about organisms being a kind of central feature. I'm trying to unpick what's central to things. So that I don't want you to think that I'm kind of saying physics got it right, therefore that's what it is. And I'm probably equally qualified in social sciences as well. I've got a few degrees in that as well. I'm a bit of a degree collector, so I've schmoozed between both fields. But I didn't mean what you think I meant. I'm not trying to say physics has got it right, so we'll apply it. But I do think I am more grappling with the nature of reality more than the kind of the how do you know about things. So we are different in that way. I think you're
maybe it picks up on another point of difference that you mentioned, which was that system thinking preferences what is. I'm not entirely sure that that's true. In fact, I'm fairly certain it's not true. But I'd say this, that a lot of system thinkers from the beginning, I'm not saying that some system thinkers don't do exactly what you've described, just as some complexity theorists you might not necessarily agree with. Sure. But if you look back at Bogdanov or von Bertalanffy, who alongside Prigogine made famous the notion of open systems, in his case concentrating in biology, or even Wiener, there's this notion of a process, the world's in process. They talked about it in terms of second law thermodynamics, the gradual running down. And they were interested in how, in Wiener's case, for example, how machines and organisms and societies can maintain stability in a world which is processual and always changing. So I don't think they disagree with complexity theories. In fact, it's processual, but they're interested in how you can maintain, let's take organizations, how you can maintain organizations as open systems in a world of considerable turbulent change, doing things that the human species might want them to do, benefiting employees, customers, all this. So that it's not unreasonable to concentrate, if you like, well, accepting the world is processual, it's not unreasonable to concentrate on those things which will enable patterns to be, in your language, patterns to be maintained when they are beneficial and useful to the human species in various ways. Yeah. So to my own mind, that makes systems thinking potentially, it's concerned more with the here and now, not with grand rise and fall of galaxies. That's unfair, perhaps, but
yes. Just to go back on the open systems point, I mean, Prigoghine's Nobel Prize was for realizing that locally entropy goes, you know, the second law of thermodynamics goes in the wrong direction and order emerges, patterns emerge. So that was, you know, that was the start of.
So does Bertalanffy.
Bertalanffy, yes, but you were talking about the second law of thermodynamics, but it's part of the understanding of patterning.
Bertalanffy raised it in terms of living systems and
biological systems. I don't mind. I can quote you the
Prigogine
1947. Yes.
Said that this is also the case in the physical sciences.
Yeah.
Yes.
And
Bertalanffy was process driven. It was all about process.
Completely. What I was going to say, I don't have to have a Prigogine Bertalanffy war, is that organizations, you know, I think this that you describe one of your key interests, or the key interests of many systems people, is here's an organization. How do we make it resilient? How do we maintain that kind of organic nature? And what I'm also saying, I ask that question as well sometimes, but I also might be saying, how do I invade? This was a great Peter Allen word. How do I actually break some of the rigidity of this organization? Or I might be interested in, why does power constellate in the way that it does in the global political economic world? You know, what's led to that, and what do we do about it? How do we counter that? So I think I'm asking more questions, but if I were asking the question, how do I retain this organization shape, then mapping it and understanding some of the methods you used, I would go to, you know, I'd be there at your door, knocking on your door. I just think I'm asking wider questions, perhaps.
And talking of questions,
Matt, I have the chance.
Okay, sorry, Mike. Sorry.
There's a lot, because it allows me to bring in my last point of difference, and you're going to have to give Gina a respond to this as well, because I think, you see, when you start talking about making waves in getting things done in the second part of the book, you become far more systemic. You start to leave complexity theory behind and become far more systemic. So you become concerned with things like, you say standards and processes are essential and efficient, essential sometimes, we have to have them. You talk about resilience, you talk about engendering trust in bringing values together, about opposing power, about finding a way between conflicting worldviews. All these things you start to talk about, but these are the bread and butter of systems thinking. So I could point you towards systems methodologies, which would enable you to do something about all these things you say. And what I would argue, Jean, and come back at me equally strongly, when I think about a manager using your stuff, I think of them sitting in a room surrounded by maybe flip charts with all sorts of hints from complexity theory and themes from complexity theory on it, wondering which of these is relevant now to my particular circumstance. And to me, what systems thinking is able to do through its worldviews, the ontological understanding of different ways of understanding looking at the world, and its methodologies, provides much more structured ways of addressing the kinds of issues which entertain you as a complexity theorist.
Yeah. Yes. Well, I don't know that either systems thinking or complexity thinking has a monopoly on words like power. I think there'll be other people in this room, you know, the sort of process sociologists and all sorts of people would have views on some of those words. So they're just words, aren't they? That resilience, I certainly think complexity is about resilience. I think there's a lot of overlap in terms of what we're trying to do. I think that if I were working with a group of managers, I probably wouldn't use the word complexity at all. That would be a start. I would and have, if I let's say I was working with a group of managers to say, how do we improve this hospital? I'd start by saying, let's understand the wider context. What do you know, how has this hospital got to where it is? What are its relationships with other hospitals? What does it do with about public health? Is this a deprived area where a lot of the issues are about housing? I'd be asking these bigger questions, but I wouldn't use the word complexity. I would just be asking sensible questions that were about that broader context. And I'd be getting them to map it, and we would be having a conversation about what's key here. You know, are there things that are historically driven that have remained? Are there things that are starting to emerge that are new? What does that mean about what we should do? And then getting some ideas about that. If we then came back to the organisation, I'd be saying, is this organisation fitting the nature of its purpose? You know, is the wider world very fast changing, or is it pretty stable? What does that mean? How adaptive are you? Do your structures get in the way of doing that, or do they help? So I'd be mapping that. You would recognise, I don't know that I necessarily call it a this method or a that method, but you would recognise those methods.
So you've become more systemic.
Well, systemic is one of the key words. That
but you say you're wary of the word system. You use the word wary of the word system.
Oh yes, I don't like system.
You shouldn't be wary of it, because it's one of the greatest conceptual tools we actually have for improving organizations and societies.
Yes, I love the word systemic. I think the problem with system is it sounds like it has a boundary. It sounds like you choose what goes in it, and it sounds more stable.
I don't think systems think I go back to the point that some system thinkers might use it that way, but I don't think that's the way it's used in my book. It's used as a conceptual tool. If you've got a mess, which is a hospital, you might use a systemic perspective as a conceptual tool to try and improve some aspect of it.
But I don't think you have to polarize. I mean, this book isn't about my book. Is I should wave my book at you, shouldn't I? My book is not about methods. My book is about the way we conceive of.
I know different purposes.
Yeah, but I don't think that. I think the way I teach it is, I would say systems thinkers. You won't like this, but I'm going to say it. Systems thinkers are very good at capturing now. They are less focused on the historical, contextual and emerging qualities of it. They don't do as much about that. They're not as comfortable with qualitative emergent, with noticing as opposed to capturing.
I don't agree with that at all. I mean, I think, just to take one example of Checkland's approach, he's looking for what changes are feasible and desirable in a particular context, having taken into account the history and the power relationships and the rest of it. So I'll leave it, but I don't agree with that point.
No, well, that's
okay. Right. As we have got to that point, and whilst I would like to explore why people talking about these subjects seem to obsess about the 1960s artists rather than more modern people that may have something to say equally. We have got a number of questions that are coming up in the chat, and I'd like to bring them close to Mike and Jean's attention. So the first one is from Andre, which is one that he says is for both of you, which is, why do you think there is so much resistance to the core ideas of general complexity and systems thinking, especially on the part of managers and strategists? And just to link that in to another question that was asked by Charlotte, which is, how far does the categorization of this is a systems approach or this is a complexity approach actually matter? One of you want to start?
Well, resistance. I do try to deal with this in the last chapter of the book. I think system thinkers often don't do themselves a lot of justice. They get involved in a lot of academic debates, and when they translate that into practical situations, they aren't going to get anywhere. You go Beatles to annoy Matt, go carrying pictures of Chairman Mao, you ain't going to make it with anybody anyhow. But you know, you have to, as Jean was said, you probably need to introduce these ideas without the jargon, without necessarily talking about complexity or about systems thinking. But there are, of course, organizational barriers, the traditional hierarchies, traditional silos in organizations which prevent you doing much. There is the preponderance of the mechanistic worldview that both Jean and I are so opposed to. So those are significant barriers. Whether it matters or not, whether you say you're a systems thinker or a complexity thinker, if I was to be controversial, I'd say it seems to matter more to complexity theorists. They're the ones who are always claiming to have gone beyond, not Jean so much, but some claim to have gone beyond systems thinking. Some wouldn't even have the word system used in their seminars. I think we need to get over that. And when we talk perhaps about the future of these ideas later on, then that'll be the time to say a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so my quick answers, thanks Andre for that question. It's to do with power. I think that in the end, people in organizations, they're told, you know, people in organizations are constantly told, how do you measure your success? What's the evidence for that? What is your plan? You know, it often feels that they would do worse by saying, well, we don't really know, we're going to try. You know, you're not allowed to say that. There's such an issue around power and control that's expected, and I think psychologically for some people it's like they want to feel in control, and being told it's all very messy and emergent doesn't you know, go down well. So I think that there is a big resistance, and in some ways I think that's got worse. You know, if you look at the way, you know, particularly in some parts of the world, you know, particularly in the UK, you know, if you take education, we're about at the bottom of measures of numeracy and literacy, but our policy response is always to tighten up the machine, or to measure more often, or to tell people exactly how to teach, you know, and write it down and then measure it and justify it, you know, rather than sit under a tree and talk about, you know, trees. So I think there's a resistance. There's also, I think what I want to say to people is, I sometimes feel with some systems people is they're still telling you, you know, trust me, it's going to be all right. We've got a method, you know, we can do it. You know, it might be complicated, but it's doable. And I think there's something psychologically that I would like to bring in, which is, how do we deal with ambiguity? How do we deal with judgment? How do we deal with the kind of, you know, the emergence of things that we haven't even imagined? So it has, I think, for me, the complexity message has a more granular feel. It's more about, you don't know, but you've got to be attuned to what is and notice change. It just has a different feel to it. But I don't, you know, it's something we can go back to. They're not totally different, but when I talk to systems people, I kind of know they're a systems person, and when I talk to a complexity person, they see that there's more of a resonance in a kind of more a softer, more holistic, more relational, more intuitive approach. So not all of them, but
Okay, that's quite interesting. And just bringing into question the question from Sharon.
There is this other aspect is, to answer that excellent question, is that there has been traditionally divisions among systems people, which doesn't help anybody when you have warring factions. And I have to say there are divisions in complexity theory as well. If not warring factions, there are certainly different interpretations of complexity theory. And that doesn't help the cause of either.
Okay, so the next question, which comes from Sharon, is how does your perspective deal with uncertainty and with changing?
Shall I go first, since there's this notion that systems is perhaps less attuned to that? Well, I think it's all based upon the notion of uncertainty. It's based upon generalized complexity, upon turbulence. I mean, I almost totally accept Jean's view of the of process complexity as a reasonable description, an attempt to understand the kind of volatile world in which we live. But we have found ways of engaging with that world, not by mirroring it, finding accurate pictures of it, but by attuning ourselves to it, to the sense that we're able to act productively in it and achieve certain things. And the mechanical systems thing, I mean, that's important. Jean accepts it, processes. That's an important way of doing it, and there are other important ways of engaging with that uncertainty. But there's no one way. So within systems thinking nowadays, I think there's a full acceptance of uncertainty. A change comes from to some extent from the ethical stance that you want to try and make the world a better place. I think actually it's true of most managers. We can talk about the hierarchies, but a lot of managers are in tune with it as well. It's not right topic. We need to form coalitions which can react against all the way things are going in certain directions. And so I think both books concern themselves with uncertainty and change.
Yes, I think the way that I talk at one of the pieces I write is called Simplicity on the Other Side of Complexity, and there is a sense in which if you allow the whole rich picture to, sorry, I'm using a systems word, Mike, but you know, if you look at that whole that was supposed to be a joke. It was supposed to be, yeah, that went well. Okay, thank you, Martin. If you draw the whole rich picture, sometimes what to do becomes clearer. There's a sort of simplicity about, well, this is a good starting point. Here's a good place to start. This is really important. So I think there is something that can be done about that. But I think we've also got, you know, I think uncertainty is great. You know, it is like there's a psychological predisposition. You know, who wants certainty? You know, uncertainty, it's a Taoist view, you know, that the whole richness of novelty and variety is how things emerge, and it's how we adapt. It's how things become resilient. So it's actually, there's a psychological attunement to get people to be more comfortable with not knowing, using judgment, you know, using intuition, you know, not just reverting to what are the mechanistic ways, you know, what are the kind of, you know, can't think of a better word at the moment, but you know, there are ways of reducing, you know, some of what you think you don't know. But there's also something about embracing that uncertainty as something that's generative and real. And equally with change, you know, there is a predisposition. Some people like things to be certain, you know, or to be steady, but sometimes, you know, change is very positive. You know, we could so I think there's a psychological element to it, as well as a kind of trying to reduce it, which I'm sure, you know, Mike, you'd agree as well.
Yeah. No, it's much better that we've got free will and we can change and we can get things done using systems approaches.
Okay, so I've got a question from Louis. To what extent does pragmatism invite axiological blindness? Does anything go as long as it works? What are the underlying values? And interestingly enough, is what's love got to do with it? Although I'm not sure if that's a reference to Tina Turner and to try and move the whole music thing forward. But that's a question from Louis for you.
Well, I'll have a go at that one first. That's a very simple question, Louis. I don't. So I think there's two aspects to pragmatism. One of them is there's no one way to skin a cat. Sorry, that's a horrible phrase. It's the one that comes to mind. There's no one way to do things, but there are wrong ways to do things. It's not a relativist position. you know, that's the first thing to say. And the second thing to say, and it's something, you know, that Paul Cilliers I always think of in particular making this point, is you know, all of these methods, in a sense, if you want to use it, are value free. You know, they tell you how power constellates, how you know, how bad occurs. You know, it's the axiological, you know, choice is one that we make within both of these kind of approaches. You know, what are we trying to do? Is it of value to the future and to society? And I think, you know, that's certainly written in my book, and I think in Mike's too, is that I don't want to do anything that doesn't make the world a better place. I do want to challenge things. I do want to be in it, but that it's not in a sense intrinsic. It's something. I mean, Paul Cilliers made the point that in a world that's not entirely knowable, every choice is an ethical choice. You're choosing what to pay attention to. You're choosing where you're going. You know what your intentions are. So it is there, and love's got a lot to do with it, because I think there is something about, you know, that I suppose I was attracted to Taoism about, which I haven't really spoken about much here, which is the path is made through walking. So we collectively co-create the future. So, you know, dealing with people compassionately, you know, wanting a better future is how we co-create the future. And if we do the opposite, or if we think the end justifies the means, then what's introduced into the system is that it is what you do that enters into the system, not necessarily what you thought the end point might be. You know, if you lie, the lie enters the system. You might lie for good reasons, but it's the lie that enters the system. Equally, how we treat each other. You can't talk about power sharing and treat people badly. You know, it is you have to hold these ideas in and demonstrate them in the way, or try to demonstrate them in the way that you are in the world. So love's got a lot to do with it, I think.
Yeah, I agree with all those points. As a convert to pragmatism, it really liberated my thinking in a lot of ways. Once you give up the notion that you can mirror the world, get a spectator view of the world, a God's eye view of the world, then you are in danger of moving towards a relativistic position. But pragmatism saves you, because it doesn't deny the existence of a world, but it says we can't know it, but we can engage with it and see what works to the benefit of, generally speaking, the human species. And of course, it's not what works immediately, it's what works in the long term. I mean, William James and Bogdanov, as a pragmatist systems thinker, had to deal with this criticism. Now you're talking about just what works. And of course, I said, no, we're talking about an assessment over time of whether this brings benefits. And as Jean says, it liberates you, because you can create the world. If you're a pragmatist, of course, you may come up against some realities which prevent you from doing that, doing exactly what you want, but you have a lot of space, particularly in the social domain, for co-creating the world, for inventing concepts that will take you in a better direction than those which exist at the moment, which is exactly Jean's argument, sort of the concepts of the mechanistic, which have dominated our thinking in mechanistic terms. If we start introducing concepts of complexity theory, and I would say systems thinking, then that liberates our capacity to make the world a better place.
Yes, I think just to add a bit of that, I don't think we can just, you know, what I mean when I say we co-create the world is you know, so do all the other guys. You know, we you know, something that I write about in the book is, you know, we have to challenge early, because you know, when people in power start to regard the whole world as a kind of monopoly board of real estate, it can get very difficult to counter. You know, it's something that the political writers have written about a lot, about how do we engage early? How do we think about what we're doing? So, you know, sadly, you know, when you look on this big stage, we all have agency. Sometimes that agency can feel quite small, but we do have to show up with that. You know, who said, you know, evil is when good people do nothing. You know, there is that aspect of it. But, you know, it is co-creating the future means we're in it. But
Must have been Leonard Cohen, was it?
I don't think it was Leonard Cohen, some important philosopher whose name somebody will know, but I can't remember.
Okay, so but as Jean has brought up the future, and I'm aware of the time, I would like to ask you both, with Mike to go first, if that's okay. The field of systems and complexity. What are the future? What is the future for them both?
Okay, well, as I started off by saying, the demand for systems thinking is huge, as the World Health Organization, the United Nations, UNICEF, the systems thinking interest group in the civil service now is over 1,000 people. But the supply of trained systems thinkers is poor. Some of the established systems groupings, for example, the Open University and the Centre for System Studies at Hull, are under threat. The systems thinking apprenticeship is under threat. When you get huge demand and weak supply, then the gap is often filled by charlatans who claim to be doing systems thinking, but really don't know much about the history of it or the way that it works, and then reinvent the wheel at the very best. So I would, put in a plea. I think we need to somehow do something about the supply side. And I think Jean's talked as well to me about the same thing being the case, paradoxically, in the complexity community. The forces, the educational. She talks nicely in the book about the Finnish education system, where people go out and do practical projects, interdisciplinary projects. There's nothing like that much in UK universities at the moment. So I'd like to see a big shift there to enhance systems thinking and complexity theory. Let me start my second point with a quotation from Koestler, which I use in my book. The most striking indication of the pathology of our species is the contrast between the unique technological achievements and its equally unique incompetence in the conduct of its social affairs. Now, if you think that our currently great technological achievement is AI, to take an example, I really am scared about how that's going to impact our capacity to conduct our social affairs, whether for good or for bad, and the same with other contemporary technological achievements. And I seriously believe that systems thinking and complexity theory can help with that side of the equation that Koestler says is hugely neglected. So we're good at technology, but we're no good at organizing our social affairs. And I really do think that systems thinking and complexity theory can help to do that, and at the same time making the most of the technological developments. Finally, I think that systems thinking, I hope it's become clear that although there are slight differences of emphasis, I personally think systems thinking and complexity can work together to do what I've just said needs doing, to create a more balanced world in which there is an acceptance of the importance of mechanical systems approach to get structures and processes and efficiency right, but also enables you to look at the world through alternative lenses. In Jean's case, the complexity lens. In my case, breaking that down, perhaps the organismic interrelationships, purposeful and societal emancipatory lens. A more balanced world if we can broaden our horizons and view the world and seek to act in the world according to those alternative ways of perceiving things and doing things.
Okay. I think I still feel that the focus in systems thinking is about doing things in a new way, and I think what I'm saying is we have to think differently. I'm challenging thinking, like, what is the world really like, and I think that's really that constant challenge. It sometimes feels in a kind of mechanical worldview that people would rather stick to the rules than do something useful, and it's more than methods. It's more a view, about trying things out, about allowing for judgment, about, you know, supporting people who go further than they need to. The story comes to mind about my which I probably shouldn't tell because it'll take too long, about my mum in a hospital when she was near the end of her life, and she moved hospitals and there wasn't a bed ready for her. And when I arrived on the train, my very strong-minded mother was having hysterics, and she'd been left in a room for hours. And when I went and approached people, they said, you know, I said, why haven't you taken her to the toilet? You know, why haven't she had anything to eat? And the answer to all the questions was, well, she hasn't been admitted. There was no process because she hadn't been admitted. And by the time I'd gone ballistic, she somehow or other magically got admitted in about 3 seconds. And then these things happened. And I felt that they'd rather stick to the rules than actually deal with the reality of the situation. So I think this, I'm using that as an example of, we have to get people to think differently, and sometimes it's going back to ways that people thought in a more pragmatic way, like the Finnish education system. I'm sure my education system was more like that than it's become in this kind of continually becoming more mechanical. So I think we've got to find ways, and we have slightly different ways of getting this conversation about how do you recognize something systemic, emergent, contextual, integrative in the world, and see that as more normal. And I think that's difficult because it doesn't fit with everybody's psychology. It's a big jump for people. So that's one point I wanted to make. The other point I wanted to make is I think there's a real there's something really to address as a community about how do we deal with different views. And sometimes I think two things. I'm really opposed to the kind of dialogue where somebody completely rubbishes somebody's work or tells them they're wrong. You know, there are posts on LinkedIn sometimes where there was one that I didn't catch early enough to intervene, where somebody new to the field had been kind of exploring it, and somebody came in and said, well, that's wrong. And this poor woman apologized, you know, for having kind of, you know, got it wrong. We've got to engender a community where people can learn. There's you know, we've got to dialogue. We've got to help people understand the differences, you know, like Mike and I are trying to do. You know, if we can understand our own differences, we can help other people to navigate when they would say, oh, you know, Jean's ideas here are really good, you know, but for this I'm going to go to Mike's ideas. You know, that's important, to have dialogue and to have a kind of, it's not that we all have to agree, but we have to disagree in a respectful and specific and critical, using the word another word we both use, Mike, I've got to mention, is critical. Criticality is important. I'm also concerned in the way these fields are moving on, is that I think it's really important to go to people for information who reference work, who've dialogued, who've really thought hard about this and show their workings. And I feel worried when people post things that seem to have no references. They sometimes don't even have a name, and they purport to have to express an idea. These are very complex ideas. You know, an idea like emergence is very difficult. I've slaved away at thinking about what I think that means and how I express it. So we need to develop a field where we are where we communicate and dialogue in a way that generates learning and understanding. But we also have to really be wary of people who seem to work entirely on their own, who don't seem to reference, you know, who are very dogmatic, and who, you know, who are not contextualizing their work. There's a lot of the work on complexity doesn't get anywhere near LinkedIn either. I've been kind of a bit surprised by that. There's a lot more going on than you know. I've talked to some of the people I know. They don't really go near that kind of thing. So if you want to learn about these fields, you know, it is important to, you know, to do your homework and to look at who's writing and that sort of thing. So So it's important, you know, this is important. I completely agree with Mike, whatever labels you put on this. This is really important work for the future. We've got to counter this on the one hand, resort to the mechanical in organizations, which seems to be constantly about, you know, trying to, you know, tie everything down. Meanwhile, in the wider global economy, anything goes, you know, so we have a kind of laissez-faire, you know, we can do anything, there are no rules going on out there, coupled with this kind of micromanagement going on in organizations. And I think we have something to offer that field, but dialogue well, but beware of, you know, those people who are writing in this field, you know, do say who you are, you know, do reference things, don't assert things. It's just, you know, without contextualizing where you're coming from. I think that was what I wanted to say.
Okay, I'm very aware of the time. Mike, would you like to just give a final comment before we wrap it up?
No, I'd agree with Jean on that. I think we have explored the ideas well in this debate. I've great respect for Jean's book. I'm not going to repeat some of the arguments what I think systems thinking can do well. I think I'd rather leave it to you, Matt, to come up with a quote from Taylor Swift or one of your modern people who's got something you think's got something to say.
Oh, I've been put on the spot there. I wouldn't
Taylor
even
Swift?
know. I tell you, no, that's my daughter. You would need to ask my daughter
Right.
about Taylor Swift, I'm afraid. I am tempted to mention Depeche Mode here, who claim that everything counts in large amounts. And that could be seen to be appropriate or not, as the case may be. I have been asked to remind people this was a joint event from the Centre for System Studies in Hull and the OR Society. So thank you very much to everybody for coming. But very importantly, can I thank Jean and for Mike for giving up their time and their knowledge. Whilst I know they're here to promote their books, having spoken to them in preparation for the event, they're more passionate about sharing what they've got to share than their book sales. And if the audience would like to be aware of future sessions or to contribute in future, you can contact either myself or Gemma Smith, who is the secretary for the OR Systems Thinking SIG. We're available through many things and many formats. And I would recommend that we've also got the Euro 25 conference in Leeds from June 22nd to 25th, which we've managed to get as Jean probably will frown at this stage, a system thinking stream added this year, which is a really important thing that we're very proud of achieving. So please consider putting abstracts in, even if they're about complexity, and coming to Leeds, because it will be a great event. But once again, thank you to everybody for coming tonight. Hopefully I'll see you at future events, and please have a great night.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you, Matt. Brilliant. Thank you, everyone.
And for me.
Yes. Thanks for having us.